and Messellech, it's so good to see you. Thanks for joining me in JinTransit.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited about today's conversation. But before we get started, please introduce yourself to my audience.
Yes, so my name is Messellech. Some know me as Selly. I am a mom of 3. I serve as Chief Operating Officer of First Focus on Children and First Focus Campaign for Children, and I'm also the host of another podcast that's supported by First Focus called Speaking of Kids.
A recent transition to co-parenting because you are no longer with your former partner. You've gone through a recent divorce, and there have been some challenges through that. And I thought that your story was one that that would be interesting to my audience, as we're, in 2025 and beyond.
Thank you again for having me because I think these conversations around transition are so important, especially now, right? Like with everything that we're facing. In the last month, I've probably had 10, 15 conversations with women that have, close friends that have lost their jobs. We're always going through transitions in life, and
Right.
mine is on divorce and relationships. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting 2 years. It's actually um October, early November marks 2 years since I started on this journey of
Oh,
divorce and navigating co-parenting, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself, about people, about family, about community, about faith, most importantly. Uh, yeah.
yeah. I think we may need a little bit of a backstory on what was the love story first, so we don't have to, maybe just, we could keep it high level, cute meet, meet cute kinda, if you don't wanna get into the whole thing. And, yeah, how did you all meet first? And then we can talk a little bit about where we saw some of the breakdown.
Yeah, we met in DC. And so, it's funny because I can still look back at that time or think back at that time and smile and remember why I fell in love and why I thought at the time, we were, and I think arguably we were compatible. That's why we got married and had 3
Yeah.
kids. But we met in DC, and on our first date, I remember it was in May of 2012, and it was like one of those first nice days of the year, and I was driving into DC to meet up with him. I lived in Maryland at the time, and he had suggested a drink at McCormick and Schmick's. I don't know, I however you pronounce that name on K Street. And my
Right.
immediate thought was like, "Cool, but it's a little stuffy," in my mind. And so as I was driving down
But the
into
place
the
always had a really nice happy hour too, so
it
yeah.
did, right, I know. So let me, like, not, you know, shit on his
Choice,
first
but
date
I get it.
concept.
I get it.
Right, right. But that wasn't my idea of, like, a great first date. But at the same
Right,
time, I was like, "Whatever, low pressure, no pressure. Let me just,
right.
let's see what happens." And so as I was driving into the city, I remember thinking, it'd be a really nice day to just get ice cream and just walk around the city. And as I was driving, I get a text that's like, "Hey, do you want to get some ice cream and just, like, walk around the city?" Or something along those lines that I was like, "Oh my gosh, heck, like, this makes sense." And so I remember I picked him up and he was actually in a suit. Again, like, I was like, "Stuffy, stuffy." But we met up and I was pleasantly surprised. We had, ice cream at a little ice cream shop. I don't know if it's still there across from the Whole Foods on P Street. And then we walked around. We walked around the city. We actually ended up at one point on the benches that are now blocked off in front of the White House. And it wasn't a quick drink. Like, it ended up being a walk, ice cream, dinner, and then that, like, awkward side cheek lip kiss at the end. And that kinda started our journey. And from then, I was like, "I like this guy."
Yeah.
And fast forward, we got engaged in 2013 and we got married in 2014, and we welcomed our first child in 2016. And so it was
What
I
were
thought
some
a
of the
beautiful
qualities? Yeah, what were some of the qualities that, like, that attracted you or, made you think that you were compatible?
he was really, I thought he was really smart. And not just smart and textbook smart. I felt like, he had a lot of different certifications, a lot of different life experiences that I just thought were really fascinating. He had a 5-year plan and a goal to kind of really, be a good dad, be a good husband, be committed to family and community. So I thought our values aligned. I just thought that, even now, right? Like post divorce, when I think about, and we'll talk about that later because it's going to be a minute. But, I think when I do seek partnership in the future, if that's something that I choose, it really is a partnership, That's kinda what I saw growing up, being a child of immigrants. Like, my mom and dad, they hustled, and so it was really just a partnership. I remember them giving a kiss to each other before, they would leave in the morning, but they wouldn't necessarily talk or communicate, throughout the day, especially also back then, there were no cell phones to be checking in. You just
Right.
kinda see each other when you see each other, but that's kind of that's really what I was seeking, was a partner, and that's what I signed up for.
Were you getting it?
I think for a good period of time, yes.
Mhm.
We were building a future, moved in together, started a family. And when you're dealing with two people that are ambitious,
Right.
especially if you're, in dynamics with I knew that I signed up for someone that had big dreams,
Mhm.
to be a partner of someone that had big dreams. And I love how, we're having more conversations around this, but what that means practically speaking, because it's hard to have two people go after their dreams at the same time when you're building.
Right.
And, there's oftentimes a give or take. And so I knew I wanted to be a mom. And for me, I landed at an organization. I've been with First Focus now going on maybe 12, 13 years. And I didn't think I was going to stay there prior to that, I think my longest job may have been 3 years. And so I was grateful that I landed at an organization that allowed me to still challenge myself mentally, have the work life balance to be a mom, and then serve as that partner supporting role as a wife, that allowed me the flexibility when he had to travel, when he had work commitments that would take him away, during the week or on weekends, I was able to hold it down at the house.
Right.
And so, but that doesn't come without its set of concessions. I don't know if that's the right
Yeah.
word.
Let's sit here for a minute because were there any questions that you and him asked of each other in the beginning about what this partnership was gonna look like as 2 ambitious folks? And then was there a pivot in like, once you started, realizing that you both were not going to be at the top spot at the same time all the time, that you had to re-ask and then re-answer?
That's a really great question. To answer the first one, we went through premarital counseling. There's a church here, McLean Bible Church, that we went through premarital counseling. And during the series of sessions, there was like, I remember a long list of questions that he answered independently, that I answered independently. Then we came together and went over them together with
Mhm.
a pastor. And anytime that there was an alignment, we would pause and talk about it. And so I remember the question of, I don't remember the exact question, but the topic of, breadwinner, who's doing what, came up. And I made it very clear, like, you got it, bro. I know that I want to lead, and but I can find creative ways to do that, right? And I'm very much not a person that needs to be front and center. Like, I'm okay. Like Jordan had Pippen.
Yeah.
Like, I was okay. Yeah, like, I was okay. And so that's kinda how we always approached it.
Right.
And so I was okay with that. I was okay to be at home. But, you say that, but there are still moments, right? Like, if I'm being
Right.
honest in reflecting, there are
Mhm.
moments where you're like, "Damn, like, I guess I can't really get a job where I can travel." Like,
Mm.
like, there are moments that I think women face in general if you choose to wanna be present with your kid's life and serve as chief operating officer of the home, right?
Yeah.
There are things that you just can't do. And I think, we've had more conversations, national discourse around what this is like for women. And I think Michelle Obama always says it right, where it's like, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same
At
time.
the same
And
time.
so for me, it was always like the long game. Like, I knew I would have my time. Um, and when moments came, like there were moments where I had an opportunity to, for example, to serve on the board, and I still do, of District Motherhood, an organization that focuses on Black moms and children in the DMV, but really across the country. And that was fulfilling to me. Like, my job working in child advocacy was very fulfilling to me.
Right.
So I think that helped balance out any, moments of, "Geez, I wish I could, go for it."
Right. So, what was it like at home in the beginning? And then as you started seeing that his ambition was ramping up and your ambition was tapered to be a supporting character.
Feel like it was an organic progression. It really was an organic progression because he went from, I don't know what the title was, but maybe like senior director level organization at an association to working at being an executive at Bank of America to then having the opportunity to lead, the Maryland Bankers Association here in Maryland. Right? And
Mhm.
so at every step of the way, that came with a new level of responsibility, a new level of stress, a new level of kind of, I remember one of my first supervisors said it takes about a year to learn your job and then a year to maybe master it. And then after that, if you're still learning, if you're still growing, if it still vibes with you, you know,
Right.
continue. And so I always kind of kept that in mind even when he took new roles. And so it was an organic process, but every step of the way I mean it felt like it was good, right? Cuz it was good for the team, right? So it's like if you got a new job, if you got a promotion, that's great cuz now we have 2 kids and then, now we on the way to have 3 kids. So
Right.
these kids are expensive. And so and I work in nonprofit, right? So it's like there's a realistic cap to what my earning potential is in the current role that I have at the current organization that I have.
Right.
It has other, great benefits, health benefits, other perks, work-life balance. But in terms of that, and I also thought that was a balance, right? Like when my daughter was born, I went from working 5 days a week to working 4 days a week. That's like a family economics issue, right? Like, and that's so again, so many women are dealing with that now, right? Do I continue to work or do I stay at home to care for the kids?
Right.
At the end of the day, like, yes, that's a personal decision, but it's also a family economics issue. Like, what makes the most sense for us? Does it make sense for you to be working, if your earning potential exceeds what the crazy levels of childcare cost is?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
also the elements of early childhood bonding and all the benefits that come from just being around more.
So it seems like right now, like from what we're hearing so far, like you were in some level of this is working. What started to happen?
What started to happen now, especially in reflection, was an increasing amount of cycles of emotional abuse.
Okay.
And in hindsight, a steady and increasing level of financial abuse. And it's one of those things that when you're in it, it's hard to see it. And if I didn't live through it myself, I think when I hear stories or when I have heard stories, you're like, that doesn't seem right. That shit's off. And I think I really started to it hit me, like, I think I had an aha moment, probably Mother's Day 2022,
Mm.
because
Mhm.
I'm the you like, when you're with someone that really initially mirrors a lot of your values
Right.
and you think that you're locked in there and that's a given, and you're moving from that foundation, and when things don't align, there's a level of, like, cognitive dissonance that happens that
Mhm.
it's hard to understand why certain actions or certain conversations that keep happening aren't really aligning, and so the way my mind is wired and I'm wired to see potential, right? Like, just the way like, and professionally, personally, like, I'm just wired that way, and so it was just there were layers of confusion, but I think Mother's Day 2022 was when I was like, "Damn, like, there's really not more I can do to help this situation."
So
Mm.
you had been having so when you say mirroring, you would say something, "I love cake." I love cake too.
I love baking. I
Baking's
love
amazing.
I know all the different types of flour and chocolate. Let's go
I
to
know
all
how
the
to
amazing
make it
bakeries.
grow.
Let's
And
go to
then what happened on Mother's Day 2022?
And, a lot of this is, in reflecting, right? Like, it really takes time because and it's gray and it cycles, but
Yes.
so Mother's Day 2022, at the time, so, and again, there were breakdowns and there were red flags before this period, right? But I think this was the moment in which and after this, I still wasn't, like, signing up for divorce, right? Like, this was just a moment where I was like, "Huh, this really isn't right." And so The Friday of that Mother's Day, Wells Fargo sponsors a golf tournament in Maryland, and I was pregnant at the time with our 3rd child, and he was invited to speak on a panel and had asked me to come, and I was pregnant. This is like a fancy golf course, so I was like, "Okay, I need to get clothes. I need to get something that fits." And so I ordered clothes. We had 2 kids at the time. It was something that he had to leave earlier in the morning. And so I was holding it down in the morning, got the kids ready, got them off to school, and I was heading to the golf tournament. And I remember it was raining. And I called him, I'm like, "I'm on my way, but it's raining, and so I'll probably be there in like 30, 45 minutes or 45 minutes or something." And he was like, I think you're gonna miss it." And I was like, "It's okay, I'll get there. Like I'm on my way. Literally, I'm driving. I'm on my way." And he was like, It's okay. Like it's where you park. It's gonna be far. Don't worry about it." And
Miss
after
what?
about like 3 or 4 times, I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Like, what were we missing? I thought it was a whole golf tournament.
And so I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." For those that know me, I very rarely have FOMO. And so I was like, "Bet, like, let me go turn around and get in bed." And so, I remember I checked in after his panel or conversation, fireside chat would have happened. It went well, and that was that. And so I just thought that was that. And so he came home, and I remember he was in a sour mood, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why. And my nature is I have 2 older brothers, and even since I was a kid, like, I just don't like it when people are mad at me. People that I care about deeply, right? Like, or if they are mad, now I don't, there's a lot of things that you learn as you get older, but it still bothers me when someone close to me, that I care about is upset and you just don't understand why. And so I remember asking why, and then eventually you're just like, "Okay, let me give you space, let me, make dinner, let me get the kids, whatever." And so Saturday comes around and there's like kind of like a shift in energy where it perks up and it gets back to baseline. And so in my mind, I'm thinking again, like when you marry somebody that has ambitious goals, like there are so many hidden stress levels or stressors that come, like board meetings, an email from, you know, peer that may irritate you. Like there's so many things that I understand that you may not want to talk about. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, it's probably work related. Let me just give him space and time to cool off. And then when there was a shift in energy, I was like, oh, bet. Okay, like we're back on. And that evening, we had dinner with his general counsel and his wife. And so we had a lovely dinner. And then the next day was Mother's Day. And so we had a great dinner. Energy was great. I thought, okay, like we're back on track. And then Sunday comes around and it's back to this, like, sour mood. I'm like, "What's going on?" And so we get through Mother's Day, I don't even remember because I think maybe at that point I was like, "What is happening?" Like, "What is going on? Why are you upset? Like, what's happening?" And it was either that day or maybe that week that he had shared after the tournament, we had taken a picture with the person that invited him to be on the part of the fireside chat, and his wife was there. And so I was disappointed that you weren't there. And I thought, okay, like I can understand that feeling, but does that woman have children? Like does she have young children? Like do they have help? Like is there any way that we could have expedited the situation? Like drop off is drop off. The traffic is the traffic. Like there's no hired help at home. So what outcome could have been different or could we've done in hindsight that could have shifted the outcome? And on top of that, I could have made the picture likely if I kept going, right? And so is this a frustration that warrants me being the person that you're upset with? And so for me that was a really big aha moment to recognize like you can do everything in your power and someone still may not be happy and someone still may be disappointed with you and it's confusing as fuck, and it's really confusing. And I think after that weekend, I really started to pay attention to again, like this is where I'm still wearing the goggles, right? So I was doubling down on ways that how can I be better? Like somehow from that crazy, in hindsight, crazy
Yeah,
scenario, and there's several others, right, that I can cite, but that's not the point of this, right? The point is
right.
really on the focus and the transition, but just an example of emotional abuse. and someone where that it would work, right? Like I'm a type of person that I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to get, to make sense of situations. And sometimes it's just hard to make sense of situations. And that's again like a big lesson that I learned over the last 2 years is like when shit is confusing, chances are it's not you. Or it's a God-sized problem that you can't fix.
Right. So did it get progressively worse after that? Were there other layered things? You'd mentioned also financial abuse. Did you start seeing more examples of that after you started kind of tapping into more of like what are these changes
I think I just started to pay attention more because then also I had my 3rd child in August
as-
of that year.
of that year?
And then I got through, maternity leave, and in 2023 is when I really started to recognize, "Hey, like, I know I'm done having like, we are done having children." Now was the time when I felt like I could really start to even begin to think about my life post-kids and what that might look like for me. And so I started to then lean back in to get a better handle of how are we mapping out the rest of our life, right? Like,
Mm,
so let's get a better handle on the finances.
got it.
Let's team up. And so that was when I started to realize every time I would ask to do a check-in,
Mhm.
it was met with tension and it was with dismissiveness. And
And that's
again,
check in on your finances?
check in on the finances,
Okay.
right? It's like, okay, now we have 3 kids in, we have to think about childcare for one potentially. One is, staying home because again, post-COVID, I was able to keep my youngest one at home. I mean, he just started daycare, in this past August, September. But, we're starting to map out what does the family budget look like now with 3 kids? What does the family budget look like moving forward? How are we starting to layer in another 529 plan? Like, let's just start to have these conversations. Like,
Right.
nothing, and over the years, early on, everything was, we did have more conversations together, and we did have a clearer roadmap of what our financial expectations, goals, etcetera were. But over the years, life gets busy, you have kids, there's commitments, there's vacations, there's, highs and lows with work and life, and those conversations sort of tapered off. And again, I really started to pay attention to, all right, and also pay attention to what I was saying, but paying attention to what was said to me. And so oftentimes when I would try to have the conversations around money, it was very much directed in how can we add more money to the pot, right? So it's like, what are you doing to add more money? And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna restart consulting on the side, right? Thinking of different things, like, we're saving money by not sending our youngest to daycare. But also, I'm a firm believer in it's not always how much money you're bringing in, it's what you're doing with the money that you have, and if we need to adjust things, like, that's fine. I don't need, want, or nor have, like, a lineup of designer items anywhere, And so we can think through what makes sense for us together.
Right.
And that is when really 2023 is when I started to realize, like, that's not happening. But again, I didn't really understand why, and I didn't really pinpoint it even being on him. I just knew that it was something that was causing tension, and I didn't understand why there was tension there, and I was trying to almost explain, why there shouldn't be tension, right? Is like, if we haven't hit our goal, that's okay, like, we can pivot or, what do we want the goal to be for this year? And so that's really how it unfolded until ultimately, October, November, summer of 2023, he had an opportunity to apply and was encouraged by several people to apply to lead the Florida Bankers Association. And that would have come with a significant jump in salary. And, I was all in, right? Like for me, I was like, if this is where you feel like God is leading you, God's leading this family, if it means moving to Florida, that's fine. And so we started that process and things started to be fine, right? Like there was a steady level of good energy. We're in this together, very collaborative, very supportive. And then in August or September of 2023, he found out that he didn't get the position. And we all know we've all been there. A lot of people have all been there. That happens. And in my mind, yes, that was I know that he was excited for that position,
Right.
but also, like, would that have been the best position for a lot of different reasons? And also, I'm a believer in if you don't get this position, it's for a reason. Like, God has something better for you that's more aligned with what you need in this season. And so it's okay. Like, something else will come along. At least you still have a job. It's a great, job. Now you've been at it for a few years, you know what to expect.
Right.
And then also, if this isn't what you wanna do, that's fine too. Let's talk about it, right? Like, if you wanna start a whole new career, if you want to, officiate basketball, bet. Like, that we could you know what I mean? Like, whatever your passion is, like, we could figure it out, you know? And even if that meant a change in lifestyle, right? Like, I think it's really about what makes people happy.
Was not it.
That was not it. That was not it. And then, in October, November of 2023, he pretty much was like, "This isn't working. I want out." And then that's when the confusion kind of just I don't know, went off the fucking Richter scale because I was like, "What is actually happening right now?"
So he asked for the divorce.
He asked for the divorce. Yeah. He asked for the divorce um in fall of 2023. So, yeah, 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and what became strange was just the behavior, It's like
Right.
I didn't ask for the divorce, but, I had to accept it at some point, Like, I
Right.
definitely fought, like, I wrote letters, I engaged, frat brothers, I engaged family members, mentors, the person that married us, like, several people that I was like, "What's happening? And also, can we save this?" Like, I'm not really sure what the issues are. Whatever they are, I'm sure we can figure it out. In hindsight, I realized, you can't see the full picture. God can see the full picture. God knows what's on everybody's heart. And he doesn't like when people play with his kids. And sometimes, you may be okay with that, but he's not. And he definitely redirected me. And I can see that now in hindsight. But if you were to transport me 2 years ago, I was stuck on sad girl. Like, I
Yeah.
was so sad. And I really thought all of it was my fault. All of it was my fault. And that was just a hard.
With all of the you can change careers, we can reposition, I can move you to Florida. Still thinking this is your fault.
Right, because in my mind, I'm like, trying to reconcile how is it, a few months ago we were gonna move our whole family to Florida, and now you're like, "I'm out," you know?
Yeah.
And that was just hard for me to process. That was hard for me to process.
So what were some things that were revealed through that process, through your divorce process? And who did you lean on?
Yeah, I mean, during the divorce process, you see everything during divorce. Like, when for and I don't wish divorce on anybody. Especially if you have kids. It's rough. It's rough. And so in terms of what I discovered is, there was really I mean, on the financial front, there was no real money in the pot. No, there was no real money in the pot. And so that was it. Like on that front, there was no real there was nothing on that front
To salvage.
to salvage, you know? And you just wrap your head around that. And so it becomes like, why are you then going through a long drawn out divorce, right? Like, if
Right.
there's nothing on that front, it's pretty much we're both working. And just given how I grew up and my work in child advocacy, even attempting to not split and the fact that we had 3 kids, like, the kids were never really up for, at least in my mind, debate, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
try to co-parent as best as we can, and let's
Right.
split the time because they, enjoy spending time with their dad. And
That's the
I
point.
I didn't sign up. I don't think any woman has 3 children by somebody and expects to then raise them by themselves.
At this point, it was like, wow, 10
Yeah.
plus years, all this effort, all this mirroring. At the end of the day, this was lots of gaslighting, but we gotta move on.
You gotta move on. And so, for me, I started seeing a therapist to help me unpack this. And a few months in, she was like, I'm sure she was so irritated with me because, like, I was stuck on again, like, what did I do wrong? And it wasn't until she sent me this chart. She sent me this chart and it's this chart called The Cycle of Abuse, and it has 4 steps in it.
Thank you.
And
Mhm.
she just sent this to me and she was like, "Does any of this feel familiar, or does any of this feel like stuff that you experienced?" And I just remember breaking down because I was like, "Yeah," for arguably probably the last 5, 6 years of our marriage, yeah, that cycle is what I was experiencing.
Mhm.
And she showed me that to help me understand, like, you were caught up. Like, you were caught up. Yes, relationships are co-created and everyone kind of plays their role. I can see how I shrunk myself. I could see how I didn't push harder for the sake of peace, or for the sake of, reconciliation, or for the sake of let's move past this because we all got, a billion other things to do. And, I just wanna smooth things over. That didn't serve me over the years, especially when, in hindsight, you realize, you were potentially dealing with someone that didn't have those same intentions,
Right.
you know?
I mean, also, you are a woman of faith, and you have 3 beautiful children, and you had from what I understand, right, from our years of friendship, you also had a family that stayed together. So, you were really, really gunning, and you, for all intents and purposes, have not ever said anything about your partner. So, I commend you, like, it really did take, yeah.
But there came a point when then you kind of when the lights come on and the
Right,
goggles come off,
right,
and you're just like, "Holy shit," you know?
right.
You're really left with, "Oh my gosh," you know? And during the divorce process, again, I didn't understand why everything kept dragging out.
Mhm.
I didn't understand why everything was dragging out. Because in my mind, I'm like, "Why should we be spending all this money that we don't even have," for something that's not even really complicated, right? Like, we were in a situation where, income-wise, he was the breadwinner. He made, double what I made, more than double what I made. And so I was thinking, well, this is logical. We had joint credit cards. We both used them. Actually, that's not true. There were credit cards on my name that he was an authorized user for. And so I was approaching everything with logic. And just saying, well, let's split the credit cards in half. Let's, you pay this for support. And I presented a whole detailed, plan
Plan.
of let's think through how we should raise the kids. Let's set parameters on exposure to cell phones and technology and social media. Let's just talk through these things, right? Like, if this is where we are, and arguably, it's not okay in one sense because it's so devastating, especially for Black families, and especially Black families that have potential to do so much. It's sad, and you don't owe anybody an explanation to a degree, right? Like, if you wanna
Right.
get up and leave and just say, "Peace out," that's fine, but then at least let's move with intention and logic, because now the unit of the marriage isn't what's prioritized anymore. Like, that's no longer number 1. And so what's number 1 is the children, and
Right.
prioritizing what they need, and what they need are 2 parents that are emotionally, financially stable, and can approach this in a way that centers them and their needs and not ours, right? Like, they didn't ask for this. And no matter what the situation is, once you get to a point where you're divorced, I mean, if anyone was going to be upset in this situation, I think arguably it could have been me, but that's like, you just kind of have to, what is it, water under the bridge, like, you just got to let it go. And so I think for me, what was so shocking was how drawn out everything was. And because everything was so drawn out, I learned, so we kickstarted this in the top of 2024. In October of 2024, he was terminated from his job. And that was a huge blow when you're going through a divorce, because again, if we're not fighting over the kids and it's really just a matter of, what I thought was logical, like, why are we even arguing over what should just be, okay, I got this, you got this, like, let's just move our own way,
Right.
became something like a fucking roller coaster, you know? And so when he lost his job, that was a big blow, because then all the numbers changed and all the things change. And then I learned in January of now 2025, we're in, like, earlier this year, that he had sued his former employer.
Oh,
And I'm
interesting.
learning all of this in, like, the Baltimore Business Journal. Like, my lawyer's, like, sending me stuff like, "Oh, did you know this happened? Did you know they're countersuing? Did you know they're now in this legal back and forth?" And, as I was living this real time, digesting this, and then seeing what was, outlined in these articles around, financial mismanagement and things of that nature, I'm realizing, "Oh my god," like, what was happening at work was also happening in my home.
Wow.
And the real unfortunate thing about situations like this is legally no one really gives a shit, you know? Like it doesn't really matter. It's just okay, well this is kind of what you're dealing with now. Let's recalculate numbers and,
Right. And that's it.
and that's it. That's it. That's it. My lawyer was very helpful. He was a very practical man, a very practical attorney, and I was fortunate enough to have family friends that are work in family law in different states. And so they
Mhm.
were also able to offer guidance. But going through this from the lens of being, working in child advocacy for so long, you
Mhm.
really do see how the system doesn't center children. Like, the system
Right.
doesn't center the dysfunction at the level at which we were dealing with. Like, the
Right.
threshold has to be so egregiously high for the courts to act, and arguably that's not their job, right? Like, that's not their job, and no judge is gonna say, "This person's being an asshole, so let's award you this." Like, that's
Right.
not how that works, and so it's constantly pivoting, like, it's constantly mentally shifting your mind on, "Okay, this is the reality that I'm dealing with today, in this
Right.
moment," and you have to make decisions based on the information that you have in the moment. And that's really hard sometimes because you have to make decisions that have lasting impacts on your kids and lasting impacts on you with information that's not even full, right? Like forensic accounting, that's expensive. And what is that going to get you at the end of the day? And so for
What
me,
did it get you?
nothing. I mean, you know what? I
So
take that back. I take that back. It got me a lot of insight. It got me a lot of insight to then understand and reflect back on, okay, like this is why this happened, like and even as I sit here today talking to you, it's still coming from my perspective, right? Like, it's coming from all the information that I have, bank statements, articles, that you're just trying to piecemeal it together. And then you see, geez, my God, like, thank you, God. I mean, number 1 and foremost, whenever people ask, I'm always so quick to say, it was God. Like, I spent $75,000 on this divorce and arguably 15 months. I don't know where that money came from. Like, that was honestly the parable with the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I mean, I don't know where it came from, and I don't know how I always got through the bombs that went off over the course of those 15 months, you know?
wow.
It was a lot of prayer, it was a lot of asking friends to pray for me, to pray for him, to pray for my kids, like, pray that, emotions can kinda settle, like our Forever Flotus always talks about, when they go low, you go high. But, we don't talk enough about the emotional regulation and maturity and, restraint that it takes to continuously be
Right.
grounded, That takes a lot. That takes a lot. That takes a lot, especially, when you're healing, when, patterns haven't really shifted, when you have kids involved. Kids don't care. I mean, and no, nor should they, right? Like,
Right.
they don't have to. This is not them. And so for me, it translated to, or it resulted in our final mediation session. So we started going through mediation. He actually served me divorce papers to kickstart the official legal route in August of 2024. And we ultimately, there's only a few percentage of cases, less than 5, less than 3% that actually make it all the way to court before a
Sure.
judge. Most families and couples settle outside of that. And so when we reached our final mediation, I think in early 2025, it was just like, you gotta walk away with nothing. No child support, no, you're pretty much on your own. And that was really hard. Like, that was a really, really, really hard day, And I remember my lawyer, like, he was great. And he said, "You're not wrong to feel upset and betrayed, and these feelings are valid." And Your kids need you to just be done with this. Like, you will walk away with your peace. You will walk away, arguably getting a somewhat of a, maybe not a law degree, but some form of a deep understanding of family law, a deep understanding of psychology and the way people think and emotions. And that's what and piecemealed, a picture that you can put together. That's what you leave with. And, it's been about, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months since the divorce finalized, and I can 100% see how this happened for me now. 100%. 100%. The way I'm able to just regulate my emotional system. That's not the right word.
Yeah.
Is it
Emotional
the right
state.
word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're all of
You
you in
know?
there are yep.
And you don't
You're
have
happy.
to and you don't have to consider feelings. Like, you don't have to consider somebody that for so long you considered, and not only did you consider, but that was your priority.
Right. Right.
It leaves space to breathe. It leaves space to ask questions. It leaves space to heal and to then think about, what is this new chapter gonna be?
And let's talk about that. No, honestly, um, what have you been doing to get through this?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we talked
Through
about
this
faith, and that was,
chapter?
yeah. Yeah, that was a big one. Leaning on, God and faith, but also therapy and my family and friends. Like, having community, that is everything. It takes a village. Relationships are our strongest currency. It's something that I never take for granted. I really I'm forever grateful for family and friends, because it's intentional. Like, in order to heal, it is uncomfortable, and you have to push yourself to do things or not do things that were part of just, your subconscious.
Right.
Whether it's reprogramming your brain in terms of your thought patterns and what you focus on, whether it's journaling, whether it's stopping what you do when there are, phases when all you want to do is lay in bed, and working with a therapist to be like, okay, on those days, you're at least going to take a shower, go for a 15-minute walk, and drink some water. And then if you want to get back in bed, that's fine, but let's at
Okay.
least commit to those 3 things, right? And like those are real things, right?
I know.
Like
Yes.
now I can't even imagine, being in that, because I'm also not someone that likes to be sad, or someone that likes to be upset. So
Right.
you're trying to, like, force yourself to be happy and force yourself to go through this as quickly as possible, but your mind, your body, the situation doesn't allow. And, at some point, that's when, you also have to lean on God to be like, what is it that you want me to take from this? What is that you want me to learn from this? And also proactively praying for someone that, is trying to harm you. That's hard. That's
Mhm.
hard.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
hard to, and it's not something that you would have imagined, right? So for me, those were the things that I leaned on, really faith, therapy, and my family and friends. And now slowly, like, I'm excited,
Yeah.
for this next chapter. I'm excited for, you know, my kids to see me parent them the way that I want to parent them, and instill, like, the values and the sense of community, the sense of family, the sense of stability, the sense of, emotional regulation as much as humanly possible with 3 kids that work your nerves and have questions all the time, or have a, mommy moment, but it's all the best things, right?
Absolutely. I see it. And I've spoken to a few, other friends of mine who have said that they are looking forward to that, to their their personalities being seen, their values, their time with their babies
'Cause you
alone.
forget. Like, it's crazy, like, I hear people say that, "I lost myself," and you don't really understand it until you go through it,
Right.
and then when you're out of it, you realize just how far you came, or just how far away you were from yourself. And now I have deeper, more meaningful relationships with family, with friends, strangers on the street, with my kids, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Before we ask what we should be looking out for, because I know you have exciting projects, what if anything, would you say if you for the ladies and men who are in think they're on similar relationships right now, what are some things that they should look out for? I know you mentioned this, chart that your therapist had passed along. Is it something we can link or is it like, what are some signs maybe?
I think so in terms of the signs, I would say at least in my experience, it was the growing lack of transparency around things that should have been really easy and
Mhm.
did not warrant tension, you know?
Right.
I think anyone and I think again, like, I very much view marriage as a partnership. Sometimes it's the woman, it's one partner that is good at managing money, managing finances, and that's their role, right? And so the other person's role may be other things, but there needs to be alignment, in terms of the vision, in terms of the goals, in terms
Right.
of the weak spots, right? Like things that we need to shift and we need to change. And so that's a big one. That's a big one. But I will say it's really hard to see it when you're in it.
Mhm.
But anyone that's going through a divorce actively or potentially on the verge, I would say really figure out what you're fighting for. Because oftentimes in my experience, what I've seen, not just in my situation, but in other friends that I've talked to, emotional again, like I want to come back to this just because it's so important, because it dictates so much of what drives people's actions, And I think it and that, acting off of emotion when you're going through a divorce
Mhm.
translates to tens of thousands of dollars wasted, Like, you have to get really clear on what am I willing to walk away with, And what am I willing to fight for? Because and sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's worth it. Arguably, in my situation, it wouldn't have been worth it to keep going.
Right.
It wouldn't have been worth it to keep going. And I was happy for my children because you know, irony of my life over the last 2 years, which was like a Tyler Perry movie, was a month after the divorce was finalized legally, my ex-husband won over 500 a gambling bet. And so, you have to be when I finalized my divorce, my lawyer was like, "Look, I think you know this, but I do wanna tell you, and I tell all my clients, you can't if life is a race or a journey, you really can't look at what someone else has going on. You really need to focus on yourself." I didn't think the test would come so quickly,
Right.
in which I was like, "Wow, God, like, okay." But as even as I learned that information I was actually happy. I was like, "Wow, okay, my kids will have financial stability. I won't be having to pay child support hopefully anytime soon."
Well, do they though?
And that's the thing is you gotta you gotta let that go because it's not my place anymore. It's my business by way of my kids. But even in that sense, all I can do is focus on myself, and all I can
Right.
do is focus on providing them the stability and making
On
sure
your
that
part.
on my part and regaining financial control and direction in my life.
Right.
So, it really comes down to 2 things. It's money and kids. And oftentimes, again, coming at this through the lens of a child advocate and understanding, the way the system works, even on that front, it's on overnights. It was again never a question for me to have the kids more than, let's split the let's go 50-50, right? I think my only desire was let's co-parent. Like let's still be partners in
In that
raising
decision
our
making.
children. And
Right.
even with that, I had to quickly realize that's not my reality, at least right now. And I think arguably that was the hardest thing for me to process.
Right.
That was the hardest thing for me to process. When my lawyer introduced the concept of parallel parenting to me, I literally looked at him like, what the fuck is that? Like, that makes no sense. Like, that doesn't center children at all. And, he's someone that's worked in family law for almost 25, 30 years. And it is what it is. And so you have to let go of a lot. So I would say really for anyone going through a divorce, in addition to kind of getting clear on what, your boundaries are, your firm no's and yeses are, is really the mental shift.
Mhm.
Really the mental shift because it's in certain situations, it is just not fair. Like it's not fair and it doesn't make sense. It
Right.
doesn't make sense. And also, you have to be mindful of who you share information with because if you're talking to people that have not been through a divorce, that don't really know what they're talking about, it's very easy for them to pour nonsense into your mind and for them to kind of fuel that it doesn't make sense. No, there must be something wrong. You're getting bamboozled. And yeah, arguably you're getting bamboozled, but it's not from the family court system. It's from, your partner that had been playing in your face for many years.
Right.
And so that's a process. And so I would say it's really the mental shift. As with anything, it's really your mindset on being committed to understanding that it is no longer two, it is you and it is your partner and you wish your partner the best, but you got to double down and focus on you.
Great. Well, what can we expect from you now?
So I just launched ever since I was little, I love to be in the kitchen. And
Mhm.
so I recently launched a YouTube channel called The Salty Kitchen Goddess, where you will see, mostly me, but guests, hopefully one of you'll be in there cooking up
Girl,
something.
you know I don't know how to cook, but
Well, we'll get an
you'll be
auntie, we'll
teaching
tap.
me.
Well, yeah, you could yes, exactly. You can come eat the food that I'm cooking.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
But there'll be some Ethiopian dishes in there. I'll be
Oh,
tapping
then
some
I'm
of my
definitely gonna be on it. Yeah.
yeah, like, I mean I got a Jamaican grandma that's gonna be in the kitchen. I got a good girlfriend. There's always jollof wars between my friends from Ghana and Nigeria. Maybe
Oh,
we'll kinda
wow.
settle
Oh,
something
I'm
on the
excited.
show. You'll see the kids on there. And then I'm also launching a personal podcast in early 2026
Great.
that
Oh,
I'm
I'm
very
so
excited
excited.
about.
Well, we are excited here to support you. Thank you so much for joining my podcast, and I am looking forward to posting about you and all of these future.
Thank you, Juana. Thank you so much for having this conversation. And again, like I just can't the last thing I'll just say is like I just can't help but think about all, family and friends that I know that have been dealing with a lot of transition recently, whether it's, job related, personally, professionally. And so these conversations are so important to have because you really feel like you're alone or you really feel like, your case is so different. And there's a lot of conversations that I've had recently with people and they feel shame for having lost their job or they feel embarrassed for having lost their job. And I remember having those feelings when I had to like reconcile with the fact that I'm getting divorced. And I think anytime you're dealing with a life transition, it's hard and there are all those feelings that are totally normal. And so these conversations are so important. So I'm so happy that you're picking this podcast back up. It could not have come at a more critical time.
Well, thank you, and I am happy that you were one of my first ones as I picked it up. So, more to come.
Yay.
Until next time.
Until next time.